your blood. By your blood, I'm covered by your blood, your precious blood, your holy blood. In Acts chapter 11, verse 26, it is stated that here in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. The disciples were first called Christians. We are looking at the origins of Christian. Origins of Christian. Our three areas of investigation of Christian: one, from Abraham to Jesus of Nazareth. Two, redefine Christian as in what is Christian, or to restate Christian, define Christian. And three, beyond, which is the correct application of Christian in the church today, which is how do we employ the biblical teachings, guidelines, principles in regarding Christian in the church today, in the Christian community of faith. So let me first introduce from Abraham to Christ, from Abraham to Jesus of Nazareth. If you notice, I say Jesus of Nazareth because it is a historical examination of the Christian faith in human history. And for the biblical area of this investigation, we are looking at the Jewish history. The church expanded into Gentile regions starting in Acts chapter 10. But first, we are looking at the Jewish foundation of it, which is what the Bible says that took place from the call of Abraham to the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Historical, which means in history, in the time, in human history, in time and space, right here in human history. Christian, Messiah, the Hebrew word from which Christ, the English Christos, the Greek Messiah, Ha-Messiah, the Hebrew. We have what the Jews call, what historians and scholars call the Messianic era, or the Messianic period, promise of the Messiah. I mentioned then that it starts with not when Jesus walked the shores of Galilee. It started with Abraham. Now, the importance of this investigation is not primarily a historical one, but a theological one. The history is important because we must use a guide and the significance of God's work in time and space among humans. But what we are focusing on is how throughout human history God revealed his laws, his words, his principles. So it is a theological examination of the teachings and promises of God in human history regarding the salvation of Israel and the nations. That is the promised deliverer, the promised Messiah, the prophet like unto Moses. So then, area one, we are looking at the biblical, I call it the biblical, I call it for sake of discussion, for the purpose of this investigation, this course of study. I call it the first phase, biblical theological genealogy. Biblical theological genealogy, which is we are going to examine the biblical history of the teachings of the Bible in regarding the Messiah. And we are going to look at the significant promises and foundation to the teachings regarding the Messiah as is presented, as is preserved in the Holy Bible throughout Jewish history. Biblical theological genealogy is therefore to look at the human beings through whom God gave his words regarding the Messiah and the significance of each of these periods in Jewish history, and how each promise and each phase of Jewish history is proven or is shown to be critical to the coming of the Messiah, or the promise of the Messiah and the ministry of the Messiah. Biblical theological genealogy. The first statement, therefore, is that as far as biblical teaching is concerned about covenant, the covenant that God has with humanity, as it pertains to salvation, the most important statement, or the foundational statement, the rooted statement, is the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. When God appeared to Moses, he said that I am the God of your ancestors. I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. All theological notions, principles, promises, and teaching in the Holy Scriptures has a pivot on the relationship that God had with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and how through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, God promised Israel, establish a covenant with the Israelites, and gave further prophecies through Moses, Samuel, and the prophets, the other prophets, and King David, about the coming glorious days of the Israelites, when the Messiah would reign, when the Messiah would conquer the enemies of Israel, when he would reign over both Israel and the nations. Psalm chapter 2. You shall rule them with a rod of iron. He said that, thou art my son, today I have become your father. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations as your inheritance. The nations belong to the Messiah. But it's a long process for this to come to pass. And the guide of this historical process is what God said to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If someone speak to you, therefore, about biblical promises, or someone said something about the God of the Jews, and it is not pivoted on the relationship, the covenantal relationship and promises that God made, the covenantal relationship between God, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what God promised them. So the statement, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, is the foundational theological statement in the Bible regarding covenant relationship with God and what He promises to do for His people, and how He will reign supremely over the universe